get a countdown. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Just DAO It, the podcast for people starting DAOs. I'm Adam Miller, and I'm your host. As always, we are streaming live, and then we will push this to our podcast feed later. So apologies in advance for any technical difficulties. As always, the first half of the show will be the Just DAO It news report, followed by an in-depth interview with Graham Novak, who I'm really excited to have on the show. In the first half, the Just DAO It news report, I will be summarizing recent DAO news stories, and Graham and I will be commenting on those stories, giving our hot takes if we agree or disagree with the author or what we think these articles mean for people starting DAOs. But first, I would love to just do a brief intro. Graham, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and in particular, what makes you an authority on DAOs?
Hey, Adam. Thanks for having me. Excited to join you for this. I am the CEO and founder of a company called Mezzanine Labs, and we build software for on-chain organizations. It's an application library for organizations to kind of mix and match, build their own organizations. I guess you could call me an authority in crypto or on DAOs. In 2021, I started an organization that a lot of people participated in called ConstitutionDAO. We raised over $40 million in a few short days to try to buy an original copy of the Constitution. And the whole project was literally 1 week from idea to auction. We ultimately ended up losing to Ken Griffin.
Yeah, it's an awesome story. If anyone's not familiar with the Constitution DAO story, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but you can also Google it, and there's lots of good media coverage. That's awesome. Well, let's dive into the news report. And then, as promised, after the news, we'll go into a more in-depth interview with Graham, as we always do with our guests. So for the Just DAO It news report, again, I will summarize each of these stories for the audience and for you, Graham, and we'll dive into some commentary on each one. Sound like a plan?
Sounds good.
All right. And we haven't done an episode in a couple months, so we may have a couple stories that are several weeks old, but maybe new for our audience. So the first story of the week, this is a tweet from X, and the tweet is from CityDAO, which is at CityDAO. And the tweet is, "Citizens, it's time for an important vote. Should CityDAO return our remaining funds to citizens? Vote here," on the snapshot. So for anyone who's not familiar, CityDAO has been around for at least a couple of years, and got some media coverage as well when they incorporated in Wyoming, one of the early DAO LLCs in Wyoming, and I believe bought land in Wyoming. At least they always talked about buying land. I think they bought the land, and now they're running into something that I think a lot of organizations run into at some point over their life cycle, which is that they're thinking about shutting down. And in shutting down, returning whatever funds they have in the treasury. I'm not sure what would happen with the real estate, but returning the funds they have in the treasury to citizens. So I've been part of some interesting conversations recently where, for example, I met someone who actually rage quit from CityDAO earlier on in their development. And when I say rage quit, it's not because they had built a rage quit functionality into their DAO smart contracts, which is something some DAOs do. But the founder said, okay, you know what? If you want out, it's okay. I'll give you your share of, or whatever you had purchased your NFT for, and you can get out. But now today, from what I hear, there has been no rage quitting allowed. And so that's part of the interesting discussion now is, well, you know, is the only option for them to completely shut down and return the funds to everyone? Or should there have been a rage quit function along the way? And if there was one, maybe they'd still have some passionate members and some people who would have left. So either way, it's going to be interesting to see what happens here in terms of whether they kind of wind up here and return funds to their citizens, as they call them.
Yeah. My initial reaction is there's a lot of DAOs, there's a lot of on-chain organizations that launch very rapidly, especially during the bull market, and not all of them had what I describe as like life cycle plans. Like what happens in the event that we lose steam, we run out of funding, or we just don't have enough interest, or whatever our mission is no longer feasible. Is that you have to have like some type of authority, some type of mandate from your participants. Like, are we going to do this other thing, or are we going to wind down? And if you don't have that system baked in from the onset of how you even make that decision, there's always going to be disagreements, right? And so if some people were saying, I'm surely saying, oh, like I don't want to wind down. I want to still do this. If you don't have that mandate from the onset to wind down, you're caught in a lose lose situation. Generally speaking, especially in like a circumstance like this, uh, I just encourage organizations to try to make good ethical decisions, which it seems as though they're certainly doing, right? Which is okay if we don't have maybe the ability to continue building this organization, the right thing here is return assets, distribute back to people, contribute pro rata basis. But definitely best of luck to them on that. Not easy.
Yeah, totally. Yep. Um, what do you think about rage quit as a feature for DAOs? Is that something that most DAOs should have? Is it just a design decision that maybe a select few will choose to implement?
I think it is a good mechanism for some organizations. It's not going to be right for everybody. For those who aren't familiar with Rage Quit, it basically allows a member, a participant in an organization, to take their portion of the treasury and say, "Hey, I'm going to leave." The group's going to make a decision that I don't really like, so I'm going to take my portion, the fair portion of it, and leave and choose to not participate anymore. Now, this is problematic for some organizations. If it really is, you need everything or nothing. Like if you only have half the assets and half the people leave, what you're doing might no longer be feasible. And also, it doesn't align incentives or allow an organization to have like really long term commitment to things as well. There's good circumstances and bad circumstances. I think there needs to be more ways for organizations to return money and to wind down as well. I mean, that's something that we faced at ConstitutionDAO.
Yep. Good point. Yeah, it's interesting too. When I think about traditional organizations, not digital ones, let's say public companies, there would have been no practical mechanism to do something like a rage quit function. There's just the infrastructure doesn't exist for a big public company to, allow a shareholder to say, I'm going to rage quit with 0.0001% of the company's assets, which by the way are tied up in 5 or 10 different bonds and maybe a bunch of stocks and maybe a lot of some physical assets. Now that with digital organizations having a lot of their assets on chain, at least much of the time, and this idea that so much of what's on chain is liquid or at least is tradable, now it's an option that organizations can consider for the first time. So it'll be interesting to see how that's used effectively where it is used.
Definitely.
Yep. All right. Turning to the second story of the week. So we have one more post from X. This one is from Dan Robinson, and he is a lawyer and coder and researcher at Paradigm. And his post is, it's disappointing to see a large VC try to bully the token governance process and delay community proposals at the last minute in order to advance their own pet projects. Now, this is a quote, a tweet quoting a post from Uniswap Foundation. Uniswap Foundation announced, this was about 10 days ago now, that a proposal that they were planning on taking to the DAO, actually, we're changing our minds. We're not ready to let the community make the decision. We're just going to go a certain direction. And this had the effect of rubbing some people the wrong way. I talk about this a lot because we see this a lot these days with DAOs. But, anytime there's a foundation involved, I think people need to see that as at least a yellow flag, if not a red flag, and understand what it means to have a foundation or a board of any kind involved in your DAO. If there's a board, you should think seriously about what power that board has, and do they have the power to decide what proposals are allowed to be proposed? And even if a proposal passes, is it going to get implemented? And so I think, obviously that's why I do the work that I do with the DAO LLCs, which I think are often a better fit. But I think the important thing is just to know, like, if you're dealing with a foundation, you might call it a DAO, you might not call it a DAO, but that board of the foundation gets to decide what to do with that organization. And so it shouldn't be, it might still be upsetting, but it shouldn't be a surprise when you find out, for example, that foundation is in bed with the VC of the that funded the project.
Yeah, and the back context here is there's a handful of VCs, namely Andreessen Horowitz, that have very large token stakes in Uniswap, and they have their own sets of interests, their own incentives, their own types of interest agendas. At the end of the day, that's also representative of a DAO and any organization broadly, though. Is you have lots of stakeholders and lots of different interests. So I'll actually take a counterpoint here as well, which is this is one of the stakeholders that happens to have a large amount of voting power, representing their interests. And part of this is public, part of this is private, but this is the type of politicking and pushing that happens in DAOs. And if you want the organization to function differently, you need to change the smart contracts, the parameters as to which how the organizations are the decisions are getting done, right? Um, I view this as being kind of a natural, inevitable part of the process. If someone else wants to submit the exact same proposal, they can do that without the foundation, right? So another set of individuals could propose that same thing tomorrow. They don't need the foundation's approval to do that. So
Hmm.
I see both sides of this one for sure.
Yeah, well, that's great if they don't need the foundation. Maybe people are just becoming too reliant on some of these centralized parties. I'll actually go right into one of the other stories of the week because it's related, and then we'll discuss a little bit more. So this one is from the DAO Times, and the headline is: "The Sandboxes DAO launch raises concerns over centralized control and weighted voting." So this is the Sandbox, which is the metaverse, a project that was received a lot of attention, at least also a couple of years ago during the last bull run, when these little plots of land in the world of the Sandbox became very valuable, and you had lots of big companies, Tesla, Gucci, Nike, companies like that, buying land with the hope of getting some good central real estate in this new world. And just recently, so also at the end of May, they announced the launch of their DAO. And in the launch of their DAO, which you can read more about on Medium, it's called the Sandbox DAO Vote on the Future of the Metaverse, which is the official press release post from the Sandbox about the launch of their DAO. They do talk about, for example, having these special councils. There's a council and a group of advisors, and that the council has the power to veto the DAO's decisions, among other things. And so I also don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with this. Look, I think every project, every initiative, every ecosystem, has its own origin story. It has its own group of participants, investors, contributors, users, etc. It has its own culture and values. It has its own plan and strategy. And if part of that plan is to do some things in a more quote unquote centralized way, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And whether that's through a foundation or whether that's through, a council. And I think in this case, there is also a foundation again, and maybe the council will be the board of the foundation. I'm not sure. I just think it's important for people to know what they're getting into. And I guess in the case of something like this, maybe if you got into the land 2 years ago, you might have assumed some kind of fully democratic decision-making process in your future. But I think that would have just been an assumption. And every project's different and has to decide for itself how decentralized it wants to be in the organizational regard, how distributed it wants its power to be. And if there's a couple powerful VCs, there's a couple powerful VCs. I don't think that's something that we can, from an outside perspective, just say, no, we don't ever want VCs or we don't ever want a council. At the same time, again, I just think it's important for people to know what they're getting into.
This is a classic example of an organization that made a lot of promises, and among them, conversations, discussions about decentralization. It means a lot of things to a lot of people. And ultimately, when you try to play this out, organizations take a long time to mature, and getting to the point of decentralization is a very hard thing that requires, I think, a very gradual process. And I think people see different timescales. And so some users wanted this instantaneously. Some users are like, hey, I understand this is a work in progress. We're going to get there eventually, but there's certain decisions that we need to delegate to the founding team and the operating team because they see the day to day. They know what's happening on the nitty gritty nuances. And does it make sense for a bunch of random people who don't know what's happening day to day to make a bulk of the decisions? This is the dirty grit of governance and of voting and of all the stuff that we're building and designing mechanisms around. But the biggest discrepancy here is the difference, I think, between what's promised. Our industry does tend to overpromise, and
Mm,
then the delivery of that
mm.
decentralization or that governance mechanism.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think too, to your point, it seems like it's becoming almost a generally accepted principle that you can't start out too decentralized, that you need to start out with a bit more central control, a bit more hierarchy, a bit more coordination to be successful at the early stages, that you can't just like, quickly, haphazardly give control over a protocol or a project to the community. And people are talking about progressive decentralization and that kind of thing. Is that always true? I mean, from your perspective, is it always bad to decentralize too soon or upfront? Or are there some scenarios where you actually can start out with, I mean, what about like ConstitutionDAO comes to mind, right? You guys went,
Yeah,
I don't know, was it tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of members in like 2 or 3 days? And so
yeah,
did that cause any problems, or where did that leave you on this issue?
yeah. So there's a lot of different use cases, right? Something like Bitcoin that's designed to be immutable from the onset. Great, let's start decentralized. And the sooner you can decentralize, the better. Like there's nothing to govern. There's no decisions to be made. Constitution DAO was a great example of something where the contributions, the donations, could and should be broad based. The participants could and should be broad based. But then when you start getting to that nitty gritty detail, right? If we won the auction, who's the person who actually shows up and receives the document? Who's in charge of delivering it to the museum? Who's in charge of finding the group that needs to do some of the maintenance and restoration of the document, the preservation work, right? These things don't need to be gigantic group votes. And so this is where you have to make a separation between what are operating responsibilities that are likely delegated and what are governing decisions, right? In our
Mhm.
case, a governing decision might have been something like, hey, here's 3 proposals for where to put this document. Which one do you want? And then allowing the community to govern. The operations should probably be delegated.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah.
So to answer your question, it depends on the organization. If there's no operations to be done, if Bitcoin has no work that has to be done by a central group, let it be decentralized. I also think that there's a misconception that things need to go, small, messy, and decentralized to like, wow, this is clean and decentralized, and we all like how this goes. You can also start off, centralized and structured, and then, you know, let out powers as you go. I think the biggest conflict of interest you run into is that group going to continue to execute against the plan that they promised, and then how do you assure that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's in some ways a risk either way, right? Either the community is taking the risk that they're trusting the central team to continue operating as they promised, or if the central team is giving power to the community, they're taking the risk that the community might decide to go in a different direction. It seems like maybe neither is necessarily better, just different. It's just a different risk.
Yeah, Vitalik has this really great blog post where he talks about concave decisions and convex decisions. And what this boils down to is there's some types of decisions that groups, large democratic bodies, might be very good at doing. So, for example, markets, pricing things are actually quite relatively efficient at finding a good market clearing price. Versus there might be some decisions that need to be binary. Do we do with this? Do we go with option A or option B? And this might be something that's required for legal expertise, for example, right? If an organization needs to have a legal structure, do you want to vote on that? Or do you want to say, all right, this is a really smart lawyer. We're going to pick him and her and let her make a decision for what might be right for the organization. So you've got these different types of decisions, and that's where I think stuff starts breaking down.
Yeah, it's interesting. I almost feel like, even at times over the past few years in my time as a DAO professional, um, I've at times conceptualized DAOs as really just being for the governance layer. And then maybe everything else should be done the same way it's always been done. So maybe, you instead of a shareholders and a board, maybe you have the DAO. And the DAO maybe should elect a CEO, maybe should elect a whole management team and go from there. But I feel like a lot of what people are working on in the DAO industry is actually ways of doing the work in a more decentralized way in DAOs. and not just saying it's just for the governance layer, but it's for everything. We want people to, open. We want to be open to new people joining anytime and letting anyone in the world contribute to strategy, planning, the actual work that gets done. I wonder where the DAO really is. Is it really just meant for the governance layer, or is it going to change everything about the way we operate organizations?
I've actually stopped using the word DAO by default. And the main reason being is like I think DAO, decentralized autonomous operate organization, is a specific model of a broader category. That broader category is on-chain organizations. I think we're going to see a massive amount of organizational diversity, organizational approaches, governance structures, management structures, operating structures. All these things are very different. Protocol DAOs are just one very specific vertical. And I think a DAO is a good model for managing a protocol that every once in a while needs to decide, should we upgrade? Should we turn on a fee switch? That same model might not be applicable to lots of other things. And that's a very important core tenet of mine. I think it's easy for the crypto industry to get into this echo chamber groupthink. Everyone starts regurgitating the same ideas of, oh, it has to be flat, it has to be decentralized. Not everything, right? Not every organization needs to be. Some could, some do. And I do think that generally speaking, the ethos of Web3 and the ethos of decentralization is creeping into organizations of, okay, well, how do we allow, a more a wider group of stakeholders to actually have input, or how should we be getting input from our customers into decision making? How do we get input from our employees and teammates into decision making? So I think that ethos creep that's equally important.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, even if I think about like big Fortune 500 companies that are looking at how do we use NFTs and maybe DAOs to engage our customer base better by giving them some control over something.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm so attached to the word DAO because, well, if nothing else, it's in the name of my podcast and my company. So I might have to stick with it for a while. but I can see the philosophical. What's interesting philosophically about really looking at, hey, are these really DAOs, or is digital organizations really the core innovation here? So I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have.
Definitely.
Let's turn to the next story of the week. This one is from the DAO Times as well. And the headline is DAO Accelerationism Movement Aims to Advance Decentralized Organizations. So this article is about a group called DAO Accelerationism, or DAO-AC, or actually DAO-G for DAO OGs. And it's a group of people that has organized a series of events and content over the past couple of years, somewhat loosely. It's kind of different groups of people. There's been DAO Sember, DAO Spring, there's the DAO Handbook, and I think they're also connected to the group that does MetaFest, which is a big DAO event that's coming back for the third year after a year off. So this group is kind of coalescing around a new name. They're going to do a token launch. There's a DAO-G token, and probably an NFT sale, and then use the proceeds from all these sales to help drive further progress across this kind of decentralized or headless brand that has these various events. So I bring this up just to let people know, if anything, maybe go follow DAO Spring on X. It's actually, the handle is DAO Sember, and the name changes from DAO Spring to DAO Sember depending on the time of year. But there's lots of great DAO content. And for any DAO OGs that want to get involved with helping out with a project like that, it is also a DAO that's going to be doing all this stuff. So recommend checking it out. I don't know if there's much to say on this one, Graham, but anything you want to add?
They've got an awesome handbook, a lot of great information, a lot of great resources. If you're new to DAOs, it's a great place to start reading.
Awesome. Love it. All right. Next story of the week. This one is from the Block Tribune. And the headline is, Plaintiff argues Lido DAO is subject to securities laws as an unincorporated partnership. All right. So here we have a court case. It's maybe the third high-profile court case that I'm aware of in the United States related to DAOs, where in the past there's been different things that have gone wrong with the DAO or allegedly gone wrong. But in all three cases, there's this similar pattern where what's being accused is that the DAO is an unincorporated partnership, and therefore all of the people involved in the DAO, all the token holders, should be held personally liable for whatever allegedly went wrong, which in this case is securities laws. So someone who bought the Lido token, the LDO token, and only 132 of them, I'm not sure what they're worth, but I'm assuming not a ton, lost some money, maybe $50, I'm guessing. Maybe the tokens are worth more. And now he's suing the entire DAO, which sold $3 billion worth of these tokens. I think what's interesting to me about these cases, because it aligns with the business that I'm in, is, I'll just read from the article. The defendants claim Lido DAO cannot be sued as it is a non-jurisdictional entity without legal personhood. And unfortunately, what every lawyer I know in crypto and our company and me, what we've been telling people for the past few years is that unfortunately, no one is above the law. We would love to be, but you just can't. I mean, look, if you want to be like a censorship resistant DAO that's trying to be revolutionary or subversive, maybe there are ways of using DAO technology to do that, but that's not what Lido is, right? Lido is this massive project, massive ecosystem providing a really valuable service. And frankly, for that group to say, oh, sorry, we don't really exist, it's just not going to fly in the courts. And actually, I think the case law is very clear that if you don't select a jurisdiction, if you don't select a legal entity, that actually just makes it easier for any court anywhere, including in California, which I think is where this is happening, which is probably the worst place to end up in court as a project or a crypto company, can just say, oh, well, you didn't choose a jurisdiction and you have at least one person in California and you didn't choose a legal entity, so we're going to call you a general partnership. And so unfortunately here, and now I wouldn't be surprised if this is not the whole story. Maybe there's some nuance here. I think Lido must have some legal entities involved, but maybe it never wrapped the DAO per se. Maybe it said, hey, we have a foundation, we have a lab co, but the DAO is this non-jurisdictional entity and you can't hold them responsible for anything. And unfortunately, I think that part at least is not going to fly.
I think that this brings up the proper difference between what's the legal definition of decentralization. A lot of organizations operate under the what I describe as like the guise of decentralization theater. Oh yeah, we're decentralized. Yeah, we're a DAO. No, there's no one involved. It's totally flat, whatever. And like effectively, actually, decentralized, right? You can't sue Bitcoin, right? Go try to place a lawsuit on creators of Bitcoin or the creators of Ethereum or Ethereum holders. At this point, they're now actually decentralized enough that there is no entity, there's no group to go to. You couldn't make a good argument that even the Ethereum Foundation is running Ethereum. Not at all. So far from it. And I think the thing is like, if you do have people involved, you need to have an entity that limits your liability. It's good and it's fine. Like, of course, there needs to be people involved in some of these things, but just don't leave yourself exposed from a legal standpoint. Listen to your lawyers, do the basics.
Yep, totally. So that'll be really interesting to follow, both from the securities laws perspective and this issue of DAOs and legal entities. The next story of the week, this one is from CoinDesk, and the headline is Crypto Governance Advisory NomadX raises $2.75 million. Gabriel Shapiro wants to Borgify crypto governance. A couple of bullet points here. Prominent crypto lawyer Gabriel Shapiro's NomadX raised $2.75 million at a $27.5 million valuation. The project is building new governance standards for crypto groups to use when decentralizing. So for anyone who doesn't know, this concept that Gabriel Shapiro has been promoting called the Borg has been flying around for maybe 6 to 12 months now. And really the idea is just to, it's kind of a legal concept, which is to say, look, a lot of DAOs, really a lot of crypto ecosystems should not just pick one entity. They should think about being what he describes as a Borg, which is many different entities that are all connected. And so maybe your DAO has 5 councils or committees. Maybe each of those should have a legal entity that's fit for purpose. And then maybe the head of the DAO has a legal entity, maybe it doesn't. So I believe they're building both the legal framework and some software around this concept. And Graham, this should be good news for both of us as founders in a similar space, that fellow founders getting some good funding, and excited to see what they do with the Borg. Plus, it's a cool name. So any thoughts on this one, Graham?
Yeah, it's directionally great for the industry. I think what the broader gist that Gabe is getting at with what he's building is there needs to be greater organizational diversity. There needs to be more types of approaches towards how we build and structure and manage these entities. That's a good thing. I'm never going to look down on new ways of trying to do these things. Gabe's a smart guy. He's well connected in the industry, and I think it's going to be a really interesting set of efforts. A lot of what he's working on that the article might not have mentioned is this kind of intersection between the legal and the smart contract side of things. And there's this interesting intersection. A lot of it gets gray in a legal sense, but there's also interesting, philosophical questions that you have to ask. And something that, Gabe finds himself at the center of many debates and questions on is code law? Is it not law? Where are those lines actually drawn? And there needs to be more experimentation with how can you push jurisdictions and areas to recognize the code that is written or the code that is agreed upon as being the final say, as opposed to having some type of other social contract, a law, an agreement, an off-chain agreement that might actually supersede that. So another form of experimentation. I'm certainly excited about it. And I think good things ahead.
Yep, that's awesome. Yeah. So is code law?
I don't think so. No. So in my mind, law is a social contract, right? Um, Constitution, actually, right? Great example, right? It's the most important social contract in America, and all their laws come as a result of that. The laws that Congress passes are only able to be passed because the Constitution gives power to Congress. The powers that, or the laws that states, municipalities pass only have powers because the Constitution gives them powers. All these things are just social agreements, right? The Constitution has power because I live in society and agree that we're all going to, follow the rules of that order. Smart contracts are different because they can actually mechanically enforce something, regardless of whatever a social contract somewhere says. If we both put money into an escrow account and programmatically under a certain condition, you get the money or programmatically I get the money, it doesn't matter what a social contract says, what I think should happen, what you think should happen. The code is going to get executed exactly as it's written. And the more that we can align our expectations, our social expectations, with that mechanical enforcement, the better it's going to be for you and me and for society, because then we don't have disagreements. We have less discrepancies. So the more we can align those things, the better. But the two are currently not the same.
Yeah, and I think one way of looking at it too is that in some ways these smart contracts, this code, there is automating part of contracts, but no one would have even said that contracts are law, right? Contracts are made between people within a legal framework, a social contract, etc. And contracts have to be legal to be enforceable. I guess that's where the difference is, right? If you write a regular
Right.
contract that's illegal, someone will try to reverse it. If you write a smart contract that's illegal, I guess still people may try to reverse it. So
Right.
clearly smart contracts live within the legal world and the legal system, just like regular contracts do. So I think it's risky to think that code is law, even though it's connected.
Yeah. Regardless of what happens on chain, we still live in a society with off-chain
Right.
consequences and real
Yeah.
people and laws that will follow you. And
With real
those two
guns.
things aren't the same. Yeah, real guns. The state, at the end of the day, has a monopoly on violence.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. All right. The last news story of the week. This is from DL News. And the headline is Why Arbitrum Might Shower Crypto Games with $200 million. Arbitrum DAO is voting on a proposal to create a $200 million gaming catalyst program. Critics have expressed concern that it is too high a sum. Crypto-based video games have fallen out of favor with investors. So interesting here. I think I was a little bit surprised to see the bullet point based video games have fallen out of favor with investors because I think over the past couple of years, they've raised a ton of money. And maybe that has slowed down in the past 6 to 12 months, as I think funding has for most things. But my impression was that a lot of crypto games are under development right now that are well funded. But it's just kind of a fun story. You know, I think on one hand, there may not be anything inherently wrong with giving a ton of money to help develop crypto games. I'm personally really excited about what crypto gaming might bring. On the other hand, I think, you know, when you give a group of people democratic control over money, of course, they're going to choose to do fun things with it too. And maybe that could be a criticism of DAOs, but I think, you know, in some ways, this may be an example of how we end up with a more fun world when you give power to the people. Because what do the people like? If the people like video games, they're going to fund the development of video games, and that's great. Any thoughts on this one, Graham?
Yeah, I believe the last update is that they did end up approving this vote. The main point of contention, the main point of controversy here, is actually the way in which proposals are brought, voted upon, and agreed. There's a phase where there was essentially like a soft vote, right? Gets introduced to the community, and people say, "Hey, do we want to have funding for this effort around video games?" Huge overwhelming portion of the DAO says, "Yep, sounds good." And then the formal on-chain proposal that actually allocates the capital came in with substantially more money than what was originally being requested. And everyone's like, "Yep, sounds good, sounds good." And then there was a handful of people who were saying, "Wait a second, even if we like gaming, even if the thrust of this is correct and we want to support this, this isn't exactly what we discussed." And so we have to have a broader discussion about how are we actually making decisions. And this vote was actually going on for a substantial period of time before just like a sole person like found this. And I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure credit goes to a person who goes by the pseudonym Paper Imperium. They're involved in many governance forums and does a good job of just tracking, are we doing good governance here? And in a different world, right, this could be something where no one realized and went, "Oh my gosh, we wouldn't have approved it if it was this much money." This is, I think, it's the heart of what is your governance system? What is your process? Who's involved in the decision-making process? Do you actually have good oversight? Are people even looking at the numbers on these things? It's crazy. I mean, like, this isn't a small amount of money. This is hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's insane.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, it goes back to the point of just every organization can do its governance differently, but it's important to know what system you're living in or working in, so that it's not as much of a surprise when something, at least that you know when something happens, is this the way things are supposed to go, or is there actually something wrong here?
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're saying the on-chain vote actually did end up passing, or at least the off-chain version passed?
They did end up approving the allocation of the capital. Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Exciting. All right, good. Because, you know, I tried out, there was this crypto game that came out last month that had been very hotly anticipated. And then I thought it was really boring. A Battle of Guardians, something like that. So anyways, unfortunate. Better things to come.
My take on video games is like, for a second, pause anything blockchain, pause anything crypto. Is it a good game? Like, is it a really good game that gets people coming back again? If that answer to that is yes, now let's talk. Where, on what system is it built? Does it happen to be on crypto? That needs to be the secondary question, not the first question. I don't think that something being built on crypto is ever going to attract a large, sustainable audience who's got staying power. The thing that brings staying power is good games, and broadly in the crypto space, good applications. And just being on chain isn't enough.
Yep. Yeah, good point. Yeah, I agree. I mean, to me, it's like, and as you know, I'm the type who, I love the idea of video games, and I follow a little bit of what's happening in that world. Every now and then a game captures my attention, and every now and then, like every few or several years, a game captures my attention enough that I'll put like a few $100s into whatever their system is. And in those cases, I think I would spend so much more if I actually owned the stuff I was buying, and if I could resell it in the future. I mean, I would just, you know, whereas before my limit might be like 50 to $100 if I like the game, maybe like a few $100 if I really, really love it. Yeah, my limit, I think, would go up if I'm actually buying stuff I can own and trade and sell. So, but to your point, I mean, to even get me to put like $300 into a black box that that I probably will never see again, it's got to be a good game in the first place.
Definitely needs to be a good game. I think that some projects have accidentally shot themselves in the foot. And the reason I say that is what we really need is a set of really high quality like AAA games. And like there's going to be a group
Yeah.
that nails the mechanics, that nails gameplay, that nails experience. It's going to be great, and it's also going to happen to be a blockchain. It's going to have a lot of these properties that we know to be important. The problem if you raise a bunch of money by selling NFTs, selling tokens, you've got all this money in the treasury, the operating team has this money. The incentives are a little bit backwards, right? You've got all the money now up front. Now you have to go do the hard work of building the thing. It's actually, I think, a feature, not a bug. Most of the time, when groups don't have liquidity, like if you're a startup, a startup who's building video games completely off chain, you go raise money from a VC. It's illiquid. You can't sell out. You can't make money from this yet. You don't have any choice but to go build an incredible game, get it in a bunch of hands of people, have it be wildly successful, and then maybe your game will get acquired. Maybe you can go public. Maybe so you have all these options for exits later. But if the exit happens before you build the product, there's a lot of people who are
Mm,
like, you know what? The game might come out eventually. And we've seen this cycle happen again and again. And it is a
mm,
truly broken incentive in many cases. So this is a case where a lack of liquidity on the relationship to your investment might actually be a feature.
mm. Yeah, that's interesting. So that could apply really generally to any time we're leveraging crypto to bring liquidity to any project or startup at the earliest
Yeah.
stages, right? Like if
Let
because if you get
let me
enough,
be the go ahead.
just thinking like if you get enough hype and your marketing team's good and you haven't even built anything yet, but you raise millions of dollars and you actually could walk away with that money, right? Start selling your tokens or borrowing against your tokens. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm sure a lot of people fall into that trap, right? It's like, oh, I already have $1 million. Why do I even need to go build this game, right? And then maybe you just walk
You
away.
need people to be hungry, you need them to be incentivized. I'll be
Mm,
the first to say, I guarantee you in this cohort of AI, tokens, there's tons and tons of them that don't end up building jack shit, nothing.
mm,
And there's a lot of people who make a lot of money, and that should make you mad, makes me mad,
yeah,
will make a lot of people in the industry mad, but it's because you're putting money into a bad incent mechanism that's not
yeah,
destined for success.
yep, yep. All right. With that, let's conclude the Just DAO It news report. So that was the first half of the episode. I will do a quick segue and a quick ad, and then we will turn to the featured guest interview with Graham. So for the ad, it's an ad for MyDAO, since we're the company that sponsors the show. Just reminding everyone that we're in the business of providing legal entities for DAOs and Web3 projects. And we're happy to talk to anyone who is interested in the potential for legal entities involved in their work. We also have a partner network of lawyers and tax advisors and other professionals, banks all over the world that are interested in working with DAOs and Web3 projects. So if you are looking for a lawyer or an advisor, please reach out. There's no cost to get connected. Or if you are a lawyer or a advisor of some kind interested in working with DAOs, please reach out as well to get added to our network. With that said, turning to the featured guest interview. So, what's fun about this format, Graham, is we've already gotten to talk about some really meaningful stuff. But before we get back into the weeds, let's just take one step back. And would you please share with us what got you into Web3 and DAOs in the first place?
Great question. Uh, Getting into Web3 started with crypto, specifically Bitcoin in 2017. I was running a regular Web2 company. It was a real estate aggregation platform. And one of my customers had already hit it big on Bitcoin. Um, we were having, well, it was just a really great conversation about it. And I didn't know much. And I was making the con Bitcoin argument. I was like, this is bad. It's no cash flows. I don't understand this. And he made a lot of good points. I just didn't. I didn't have a reputation for. So he recommended a book to me. It was a Digital Gold by Nathaniel Popper, and I fell down the rabbit hole. Next thing I knew, I was trying to arbitrage Litecoin and Bitcoin on like random exchanges. There was this crazy 80% premium on U.S. to foreign exchanges in 2020, or excuse me, 2017 time.
Mm.
Super illiquid. Like there was no money to be made on some of these things, but I was like, it's super fascinating. Kept falling down the crypto rabbit hole. Ended up leading crypto investing at 28th Street Ventures. It's a family office, well over a billion. I was doing private equity, software stuff, also public market software stuff. But I started the crypto investment practice and was continuing to get deeper into it. In 2021, ConstitutionDAO was just the craziest whirlwind week of my life. Um, I, I really don't even have words for it. And after that, I decided to go full time crypto. Spent some time at Salt's Crypto Fund, and now building Mezzanine for building tools for on-chain organizations.
Awesome. So tell us just a little more about Constitution DAO. I mean, how did it happen?
Yeah, I think like a lot of things, it's the right mixture of people, events, and circumstances all at the same time. The very origin of it's kind of funny. I was in a group chat with a couple friends from college. None of them are crypto. None of them are in Web3 or technology. One of them works at a auction house in Ohio and follows auction house news. Had seen this thing about this upcoming Sotheby's auction. There's an original copy of the Constitution. She sent this little article to the group, and I'd been doing research on DAOs at the time, on specifically Aaron Wright and the folks at Tribute Labs had started a group called Shark DAO. It was one of the first collector DAOs of sorts to pull together money and to purchase NFTs. And so had this fresh in my mind when I got this article. And there was two things that struck me, which is the estimated price of the auction was going to be way too low. They were estimating $10 to $15 million for a copy of the Constitution, like the Constitutional Convention copy, right? This is insane. And I was like, that's nuts. And also, fresh off thinking all this, this DAO things, I was like, we could definitely launch a DAO to buy the Constitution. So I messaged my buddy Austin. We put together a quick, like, one-page plan. Started messaging everyone we know on crypto Twitter, saying kickoff call 8 p.m. We're launching a DAO to buy the Constitution. A bunch of folks showed up immediately after. Kicked off the Twitter, the Discord. By that point, we'd already reached out to Sotheby's. We had 3 different plans in parallel to start legal entities to be able to actually participate in the auction. So all the parts started getting moving right away. And then the whole thing was exactly 1 week. Like we started on November 11th was the day we hosted that kickoff call. November 18th, 1 week later, core team was in New York City, a couple blocks away, on the phone with David Schrader, and Brooke was the famous person across from us bidding on behalf of Ken Griffin.
That's awesome. That's cool. So what I didn't realize until now was that we passed our first law in the Marshall Islands in November of 2021. Is that when you're talking about too?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah, around the same time. That's cool. Well, really exciting story. Again, I definitely recommend people check out the Constitution DAO story online. Although, are there, before people go do that, are there things they get wrong in the media? Like, if people just go Google this, is there anything you'd want them to know that was like different?
Yeah.
Or
so actually, there's all kinds of it's almost never malicious. It's just people don't have complete stories, complete facts, and part of it is we did try to keep it fairly decentralized, and so it means you don't have as much of like a clear narrative of exactly what happened. One of the things that gets wrong frequently, or people are just confused about, is, well, what happened with the money, right? We raised tens of millions of dollars worth of Ethereum. We lose the auction. What happens next? This was, very straightforward. The mechanism design that we used was, if you put in 1 Ether, you got 1 million tokens, and you would have pro rata proportional governance of the document if we'd won it. So if we didn't win, all the money went back into the smart contract. There's no fees, there's no cut, there's no pre-mine, there's nothing. And you can take your million tokens and redeem them for your underlying assets. You could get back 100% of your refund. Of course, you still pay gas fees. There's nothing we can do about that. That's just part of transaction costs. But you can get your refund. What we did not expect, what we did not know, what we did not predict, was that when we said, all right, we're winding down the organization because we lost the auction, take your money back and go home, it's the right thing, it's the ethical thing to do, people said, no, I don't want my money back. So I want my token. And they started speculating on this token on secondary markets. This thing is, to this day, right now, hundreds of millions of dollars in market cap, doing hundreds of millions of dollars of daily volume for the purpose of memes. Like, right? There's no
Yeah.
rational explanation other than people want it. There is locked underlying assets. If you were to go buy people tokens today, you could go buy them on the market and go redeem them for the underlying collateral at the same original exchange rate.
Mm.
There's no game theoretic incentive because secondary market price is just so much
Right.
higher than the value people put into it. So that's kind of the funny circumstance about how we got to where we're at today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's going to be one of the most interesting things to watch as crypto develops and hopefully goes more mainstream over time, is just how much power is there in this market capitalization mechanism that you introduce anytime something can be traded freely, or publicly, but I don't mean through the SEC,
Right.
but through just crypto markets that are practically free, and anyone can take advantage of them. And so, like, what's the power of a meme? I think maybe that's the question, right? As people are just more and more online and put more weight on the digital world, and as people are wealthier and wealthier, I mean, the wealthier people get, the more they have a few $100 or a few $1,000 to spend for fun on something. And if that fun thing is a token, well, now you have a market cap of, like you said, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. And what does that do to the economy at large if we suddenly have piles of capital being generated all over? Really, this should be a great thing for capitalism, that you can capitalize something that previously was just in our heads, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, really
It's
interesting.
I don't know exactly how it's going to pan out, but there is something that crypto has done that's the best representation of, which is things that capture a lot of mind share, things that people think about a lot, have some price, potentially value to them as well. There's the common value investing adage, I think, from Buffett or Munger or something, that price is what you pay, value is what you get. You could make an argument that price, Constitution DAO's token, is what you could buy on the market right now. The value is what is the underlying asset. There's an actual knowable value of Ethereum. For a lot of these other things, I think we're going to have interesting questions, which is, do people actually care about value? And increasingly so, the answer to that question might not be yes. That people are disconnecting from what traditional measures of value have been, not for days or weeks or months, but entire years. And so it does beg the question: is there a fundamentally different paradigm? And is the traditional means of assessing and measuring price or value or predicting that, are those beginning to deteriorate? Or are there just certain sectors that you can't apply those same rules? Do the laws of physics not apply in the
Yeah.
same way? And only long duration of time is going to tell.
But there is also like a different value that people are presumably getting, right? Like a emotional value, a spiritual value, right? Even if the underlying Ethereum isn't worth
Yeah.
much compared to the market cap. Um, and by the way, I just looked up the token. I assume it's almost 10x in the past like 3 weeks for some reason.
This is how the crypto industry works. Don't you didn't I didn't plan to make a meme coin, and it's a meme coin now.
Right.
The thing's hit over $1 billion of value here. Like, this is it's nuts.
So I hope you still have some. You don't know. Feel free to not comment on that, but I hope you still have some. I mean, I think a lot about DGen. The DGen token,
Yeah.
which probably has a similar market cap now, but this is a token that was launched about 6 months ago. It kind of launched as a meme coin, but then it became, in some ways, the unofficial token of the Farcaster ecosystem, which is, people who listen to the show know I talk about a lot, is this Web3 social network. And it irrespective of all the cool things people are doing with DGen, because there's a DGen layer 3 blockchain, there's a DGen, there's all these things people have built with DGen, there's all these apps you have to use DGen on, but still, when I look at all that activity, I'm like, it doesn't seem like much. But the market cap is, I think, probably similar to the people tokens, the Constitution DAO tokens, hundreds of millions of dollars. And I don't know, it's a head scratcher, literally and figuratively. It's just really hard to evaluate whether it should be worth that much. Could it be worth 10 times as much? Should it be worth 100 times less? It's just so hard to know.
There's not a good framework for it yet. The
Yep.
best thing I've got for now is just what is the mind space? What's the mental share? People are
Right.
thinking about it enormous amount. And people are
Yeah.
using it. People are tipping in it, and people are
Yeah.
constantly referencing it. It's on people's minds, and so to them, it has
Yeah.
some type of value. If someone's willing to
Yeah.
pay for it, there's a price.
Yeah. Interesting. I don't, it reminds me a little bit of celebrity. Like, you have these like I want to put like air quotes around celebrity. Someone's on like a reality TV show one time, like literally one
Yeah,
time, and then for the
right.
rest of their life they can go on talk shows, they can get speaking arrangements, you get paid to show up at a club and dance. It's and now, so you do one meme, you're involved in one thing that gets meme value, and you
Yeah,
potentially have a lifetime of credit for it, at least if as long as there's a token involved, right? As long as there's a token related to your meme and it gets big enough and you hold some of the tokens, maybe it's a lifetime of income, even, in a way that already exists in the celebrity industry, but maybe
yeah,
new to tech and organizations and
yeah.
our area.
Entirely.
Mm.
And some of these celebrities are very good at rolling awareness into business, and then they make a lot of really
Yeah.
good business decisions about it. I mean, the
Yep.
Kardashians are probably one of the most notable example, have earned billions of dollars, created billions of
Yeah.
dollars for themselves through the original thing was Kim Kardashian got publicly a bunch of public publicity because of a sex tape. And after
Mm.
that, they had a TV show, and after that, they
Yeah.
had music. I mean, they had all these brands, all these companies, and they've done a good job building it. But it started as originally essentially a meme, a bunch of publicity.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
All right, let's go back to okay, coming out of Constitution DAO and leading up to working on Mezzanine today, which I want to talk more about too. But I'm curious about your journey in between. Actually, not just your journey, but if you could reflect for us on the journey of the DAO industry
Hmm.
over the past few years, if that's fair to ask.
Yeah.
What's your journey been, and what has the journey been for the industry and for DAOs in the few years since Constitution DAO?
Yeah. So there's a couple charts that actually I'll send your way. We can throw into the show notes so people can access. Um, Electric Capital puts out this great developer report every year. And one of the things they charted was DAO participation, DAO activity. And this was something that they definitely tracked during 2021, 2022. I think during 2023, they might have stopped doing it because DAO activity largely started declining, and they just said, we're not going to follow this metric. But it was really funny. There's literally this inflection point in November 2021 with the measure of DAO activity is like
Mm,
going up steadily, and there's this kink point, and it just goes up, and it was Constitution DAO. And so we saw this mass creation of organizations afterwards because I mean, we got into the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, New Yorker. Everyone was talking about what was
yep.
going on, and so people said, "Wow, DAOs, like this is cool." And they started copying and pasting them all. Right? We had DAOs for purchasing basketball teams. We had DAOs for purchasing golf courses. We had DAOs for purchasing books. Did this kind of purchasing thing. Then people were saying, okay, we also have DAOs for schools and DAOs for biology and DAOs for cancer research and DAOs for this. We started this mass proliferation of them.
Mm,
And there was a lot of copy and pasting of the existing model rather than saying, for my particular use case, how do I take what's already been demonstrated to have a success and modify it for my use case? And so I think we actually saw this really, really tough period now for the last 2.5 or so years where people have been using models that are somewhat inadequate to exactly what they need and what exactly their use case is. A lot of DAOs have struggled.
mm,
A lot of DAOs had this initial burst, pop up excitement, pop up energy, enthusiasm, build out these large Discord servers. Um, and then people are like, oh yeah, what happened to them? What's going on anymore? What happened to the money? And this is, I think, on account of, do you have a model that matches well what you want to do? And in the last few years, especially, we've begun to see like there's a handful of DAOs that have done all things considered an excellent job, right? We talked about Arbitrum DAOs earlier. Arbitrum their DAO earlier, they might still be making decisions that I might view as suboptimal. Oh no, we accidentally spent, you know, tens of millions of dollars more than we all originally agreed we were going to because we didn't double check what the proposal said, right? Like crazy stuff like this. But at the same time, they're functional, they're developing and cultivating a great community. But I think that what we have to, as an industry, kind of be asking ourselves is what are those really great examples? Where have things gone well? Why did they go well? And how do we emulate those things? And I think in many of these cases, right, it's have we thought a lot about the design structure? Do we have the ability to delegate spending power to people who can make good, thoughtful decisions? Right. This is a question of capital allocation. I think those are some of the examples that are interesting. But everyone's got growing pains. MakerDAO has had a lot of growing pains. Probably one of the largest, most successful DAOs out there. Uh, Even Nouns DAO also. I mean, I think in 2022 was by a lot of measures and votes, like one of the most biggest and interesting DAOs out there. They literally had a schism, a literal split into two organizations, a hard fork, and now no one knows which the original, which community are you part of, and there's different types of disagreements. So it's growing pains. I'd categorize the last few years as growing pains, and I think going into this next cycle, we're going to take a lot of those pains, a lot of those learnings, and say, how do we be more robust? How do we approach this from more angles? And I think that's what I'm excited to see moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, it reminds me again of just this concept of like, is the DAO just the governance layer, which would be one thing. But I think what most DAOs are actually trying to do is run entire organizations differently from before, right? Like if I think about my startup, the governance layer is one of the least, it's like the least of my concerns. Now, of course, an investor might say, well, I care a lot about the governance
Yeah,
layer. And of course it's important. But like,
right.
I know who the owners are, and they pretty much have told me just do, they trust me. And now I'm the CEO. Now I go run the company. And most of what I'm worried about, I think most of what they're worried about is not governance. It's the day-to-day, the
Right.
team dynamics, the strategy, the plan, the execution, the operations, all the things we're focused on to try to build a successful business are not on the governance layer. And so I just have to wonder, if you have these DAOs, these organizations that are trying to be successful, but are focused almost entirely sometimes on governance, I feel like that's going to be a really big challenge for them.
I think vision and purpose are super essential and oftentimes lacking in DAOs. Arbitrum or L2s might have a very clear vision, which is we want to be the L2 or the network for X. And the way to get there is fairly clear: grow users, grow adoption, have useful applications in your network. A lot of other DAOs, I think there's been kind of this nebulous vision that people actually don't know what they're getting behind, don't know
Yeah.
exactly what they're rallying efforts towards. One of the reasons I think Constitution DAO was successful was it could be explained in a very simple, basic meme. We're all going to buy the Constitution. People are like, all right, I'm in, right? It's very, very
Yeah.
simple, right? It doesn't
Mm.
have to be necessarily a crazy, heady thing. It doesn't have to be a massive technological undertaking, but it needs to be very, very clear for people to be able to get behind. And I think that nebulousness is the doom of so many organizations.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's continue following the story. So that's where DAOs have been over the past couple of years. And now you're working on a project called Mezzanine. And I wanted to reflect for a second on the state of DAO tooling. And I'm curious, how, if you would agree, and then where Mezzanine fits into this. And I know you guys are looking a little more broadly or a different lens from the word DAO,
Yeah.
but I think it's still fair
Yeah.
to say it could be used as a DAO tool. If
Yes.
you had asked me, I think like 6 to 12 months ago, I probably would have told you that like last cycle, DAO tooling was not ready. It was just too hard to use. And then now it's ready. And so we're going to see this like giant proliferation of DAOs, and the tools are going to support them adequately. I think now that a little more time has gone by, I would probably say that that DAO tooling is not quite ready, and that we haven't made as much progress as I expected. And that therefore maybe it's going to be like one more cycle until like we're still very much at the experimentation stage, and like we've got to figure out how to make not only fund and make more DAO tools, but tools that are flexible enough or fit for purpose, but have found a really good product market fit. And I'm just not sure we have that yet. I mean, there were some exciting DAO tooling projects that got shut down over the last year. So I'm curious, is that indeed the state of DAO tooling, that we have a lot of progress still to go before we're ready to take DAOs mainstream? And then how are you participating in that space?
Yeah. Um, we got a long ways to go. We got a long ways to go. Uh, if we were making like the internet analogy, right? This is like late 90s. Actually, there was a really great tweet from Toby Lutke from Shopify the other day. And Shopify, if you're not familiar, right? It's a e-commerce platform that is, was started very early on. He was trying to sell snowboards online and realized, okay, I can help other people start their online stores. And when he was going out to raise money, the common thing was, well, how many how many people are going to be selling things online? How big are these internet businesses going to be? How big is e-commerce going to be? And people are still deeply skeptical of Amazon. And certainly, like this type of model where he's supposed to be helping other people build these things. And the criticism he got from people was, well, there's only like a couple dozen, maybe a couple hundred of these e-commerce stores. It just can't be that big of a market. You're not going to make that much money. People didn't believe that business was going online. And right now, a lot of people do not believe that organizations are coming on chain. It is inevitable, but it takes a long time, it takes a long adoption cycle, and there's a lot of primitives that need to exist and need to be adopted in order for them to occur. Organizations are tough, right? And especially if you start dealing with, right, we talk about the legal issues that DAOs have had. If you want to deal with the SEC, if you want to deal with FinCEN, you need to have identity. That means we have to have identity products and identity primitives. But we care about privacy, so we need to have zero knowledge identity that's privacy preserving, right? So this takes time to build. Identity is one category. Okay, now we also need to have the actual logic that facilitates the movement of money between these things, right? That's recreating what has taken decades to build in Web2 software and traditional financial rails. Now it needs to get translated over into existing or into Web3 rails. We might have some of the verbs of finance: lending, borrowing, trading, swapping. But when you think about the traditional finance space, it's really, really big. And so you've got the investing world, but then you also have the whole enterprise SaaS world that touches any
Mm.
part of like a company, nonprofit, philanthropies, organizational structure, right? You got all these tools for billing and fundraising and payroll and for, raising capital, anything that touches your money. There's software that got written as logic and it's built for old Rails. All that stuff needs to get translated. And so the problem that we face is when you only have a little bit of it, right? And someone says, I'm going to go launch a DAO. They go, oh my gosh, I'm used to having all this great software for running my organization. I've got
Mm.
nothing.
Mm.
That the lack of software creates inadequate organizations that are less empowered and have worse tools. And then those organizations, I saw over the last few years, sometimes struggle. And the lack of tooling means that people go, I'm not sure if this is really going to be a thing. So it is a struggle, but the arrow of progress and the direction of progress is very much inevitable. And what we have now, the cycle is much better. I do think this might be unpopular to some people. A lot of bad DAO tooling got funded during the bull market. When I say
Mm.
bad DAO tooling, stuff that's nonsensible. Teams that were not good, products that were not good, products that were not sensible. And so when you fund a whole wave of things during a bull market, during this period of great excitement, you don't have the idea of like, how do I make this really durable? How do I make this really useful? How do I make this really sustainable? And I think that in the last couple of years, a lot of interesting things have started getting built, and we're going to see the fruits of that. But it takes time.
Mm. So what is it that you guys are doing at Mezzanine? What's your approach? What kind of tooling are you building?
So what we're doing is essentially providing a marketplace for these types of tools. By marketplace, I mean it has a unified interface and it allows someone to connect to Know Safe and say, okay, we've started an organization, maybe we've got tokens, maybe we've got governance, all that aside. That's the governance, you've started your organization. Now you have the question, what is our organization doing? And what tools do we need to do that? So these are the questions of how does an organization have to operate day to day? The billing, the payroll, the fundraising, the invoicing. And so what this allows you to do is allows your organization to start on blank slate and say, okay, I'm an event DAO. We're hosting, ETHDC 2025, and we're going to need to issue tickets. Let me use this ticketing app. We're going to need to have a donation portal. Let me add a donation portal. We're going to need to give people maybe refunds at the end. Let's add a refund mechanism. We're going to need to so you can start building your own organization. We're gonna need to visualize our treasury. We're gonna need to manage our treasury. Let's add that tool. That dashboard is gonna look entirely different than someone else who's running, say, a developer guild, right? Me and 40 other developers start building some great software. We need to pay each other, distribute money to ourselves. We need to invoice our clients, receive money. So all these activities are coming on chain, but all of them are going to look different. But you should be able to choose between the suite of tools and services to build the organization that is exactly right for you.
Awesome. So Mezzanine is a place where you plug in as kind of like your core, and then you find all the apps that you need on the Mezzanine marketplace, whether that's payroll, billing, invoicing, fundraising, etc.
That's correct.
So what does that environment look like right now in terms of apps to plug into the marketplace? Are you finding that people have built really good solutions for a lot of these problems? Are they all under development? Do you wonder if you may have to build some yourself?
It's a mixed bag. There are some good tools that have been built. There's some that are in the works, um, and there's some that have yet to be built, and I imagine are going to be on the way. Um, the way we imagine this marketplace is we're not going to start with the assumption that anyone's just going to be say off the bat, yeah, we're going to use you for distribution, we're going to use you for monetization, get our product in people's hands. Let's start by saying let's build a basic product for batch payments, for invoicing, for these things. But if we're doing our job as a marketplace, any of the individual apps that we're starting with and letting users start with will be supplanted and replaced by a multitude of other options that are narrowly specific for a particular use case, particular function, for particular organizational type. And that's the world that we all want to live in that says, oh, I'm a grant counsel. I need a specific tool for compensating people in a nonprofit like way, or I need a way for distributing grants, right? All these things are very, very specific. But let's just start with very general tools. Um, the thing that is hard about this and something that's very important to us is we want to do it with a unified interface. So say that when you connect your safe that represents your organization, right now bouncing between a million different applications, you've got these problems of access control, you've got problems of permissioning, and just simply differences of interfaces. You also have fragmentation between chains. So if you solve a lot of that and say, look, it's a simple interface. You don't have to think about chains. You don't have to think about networks. You don't have to think about permissioning and access control. It's done at the base layer. So any of the tools that are built here all exist kind of at that same starting point, that same initial uh, point. So the only thing that those applications have to worry about is what's the actual logic? What's the actual interface? Use our SDK and make yourself available. Use this to distribute your product to many, many on-chain organizations.
So does doing that require you to create some kind of standard interfaces around the data? Like if I assume you might need to connect an invoicing with a payroll with a financial system that may all be different components in the marketplace, but they may want to be able to talk to each other. How do you make it so that they can talk to each other?
Great question. The nature of smart contracts and on-chain data makes it a lot easier for these things to interact with each other. Like if I were to make the Web 2 analogy, right? I've got Web 2 products that intentionally build walled gardens and gated moats because that's how they defend their business model. Web 3, like I can read that on-chain data. I can spin up a new interface for that exact same smart contract and say, I don't like your interface anymore. I'm going to use this other one, but I get to keep my contract that I instantiated. I get to keep my software. So there's not platform lock-in. So there's this big difference here about that underlying structural incentive.
Interesting. So just because my initial thinking is, any time you're building software, you get to decide what effectively API to make available to the world, right? Whether you're building a smart contract and technically maybe everything's available to the world by default, or you're
Sure.
building a traditional piece of software where you are a little more like, look, unless you specifically build the API, no one will be able to touch that function you want to make available. But still, in both cases, you're choosing, what functions to make available from the software to other software. And I would think that still has to be done in a careful and thoughtful way if it's going to be easy for other
Yeah.
people to interact with your software. Is it just that smart contracts, because by default they're public, people are forced to build in a way that makes them interoperable?
So yes and no, right? So if I build something that's built off smart contracts, but the most useful parts of my application are actually things that involve off-chain data and off-chain information, that organization probably still has some type of traditional Web 2 moat because that information is locked in. If you solve that at a base layer and you say, look, the basic building blocks of like your organization's identity, existence, access control, permissioning, and spending is done here, then you can allow the DApp to only focus on the logic and rationale. So all those financials are still flowing through the same treasury. All of a sudden, it becomes theoretically quite easy to generate instantaneous, live, real time, up to date cash flow statement, income statement, balance sheet, other types of financial documents, other types of reporting potentially, right? So all those types of things, if you've got things coming through smart contracts, are definitely very feasible. Um, with existing financial rails, maybe that API is down, maybe that company goes under, and I can't export any of that data. I now have to like go rebuild my system somewhere else. If I don't like an interface, I could actually just go spin it up somewhere else. But you're right. There are certainly questions, and there's a question of standardization, and part of our product does require some standardization so that the user gets a delightful, unified
Yeah.
experience. And this is an important push and pull in crypto world, which is how
Mm,
standardized do you want to make something? And I'd make the argument that the most powerful thing in crypto is standards, right? The ERC20
mm,
standard means that anyone can go launch a 20, follow that standard, and they know, oh, this product I created is compatible on this exchange and this lending protocol, this thing,
yeah.
right? So it is that standardization that is truly, truly
Mm.
powerful. But if it's only in the back end, then you have some limitations. So we're introducing some additional standardization at the platform level, at the interface level, to make it easier for these organizations so there isn't so much fragmentation and splintering and horrific user experience.
Awesome. Do you see a potential to have actual like EIPs or official standards related to DAOs and digital organizations? Is that something you guys have thought about? Do you see other people doing it?
I don't think what we're doing has aspirations for EIPs. Um, I think that the EIP adjacent area would be things like, you know, how do you choose to structure account abstraction, because organizations might have a specific structure that might be useful for them. But I think most of these things are best off done at the smart contract level rather than the blockchain level.
Cool. Awesome. So I want to ask you to reflect a little bit on the current state of DAOs. I know we've already talked a lot about where DAOs have been, where they are, maybe where they're going. But I assume through your work that you get to talk to a lot of DAO related folks like myself and probably
Yeah,
many others. I mean, what are you hearing in the DAO world in terms of how we're doing, what we're doing wrong, where we're going? Any highlights that you could share with me and with the audience?
definitely. Um, I want to start with maybe um, the parts about like some of the things that are challenging. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but it's this idea around organizational diversity. I almost think the analogy of like why is biological diversity important, right? So you've got a whole bunch of plant crops, a single parasite comes in, doesn't wipe out everything. Biological diversity is important. Same is true for organizations, right? We don't want monocrops in our organizations. We don't want them to all be copy and paste of each other. And so one of the issues that a lot of people are working on, actually just today, I wish we'd maybe include it in the news update. Maybe it's a good one to add for next week.
Mhm.
ZK Sync just announced something called ZK Nation. It's a slightly different type of governance structure that has three types of bodies to it. This is a great example. Organizational diversity, a new approach, a new methodology, using some of the interesting learnings, things that help prevent major downfalls. And this is a very interesting structure. I hope people take it and continue to iterate on it. It's designed to have three bodies. So they've got a token body, they've got a security council, they've got a guardian council, right? So now we're starting to evolve. How do we protect people? How do we make sure we're protecting against exploits, but also how are we giving democratic say to participants? How are we delegating some responsibilities? This is good. All of these things are good. So this is, I think, quintessential. How do we encourage even more of that? I think earlier, right, we talked about how is Arbitrum spending money? I think organizations have this question about how are we spending money? How are we allocating capital? This is a very top of mind question for lots and lots of DAOs because a lot of them raised large treasuries and then have been continuously spending, and starting to see the numbers dwindle and are asking themselves the question, how sustainable is this? Does this make sense? And so you always have to ask yourself the question, why am I spending money? What is the use of this money? Is it accomplishing my objective? Is it going to grow users on the network to allow me to generate fees, to allow me to have more assets to distribute into the system again? Maybe that's the objective. Are you going to accomplish that with games? Are you going to accomplish that with organizations? Now that's where we get into nitty gritty conversations. There's lots of theories about it, but still the question is, how do you effectively spend money is a very good question. I think the same types of organizational rot that we see in governments and bureaucracies and philanthropies and nonprofits of where did that money go, and
Hmm.
what happened to that funding, and oh, I know a buddy who's on the grant council and he's going to make sure we get
Yep.
$1 million budget for this thing, right? These are systemic. I mean, not even dozens of years old. I mean, hundreds, thousands of years old, right?
Yeah.
These are problems that every civilization has dealt with, which is how do we effectively spend that money? These tools are actually designed to be perfect to solve them, but we have to build good tools for it, right? How do you build in accountability? How do you build in good design choices? We're still in infancy, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I also feel like, the tools that we're building in the DAO industry provide a new set of options that you can use and combine with all of the options that have been available for thousands of years, or that have been developed over
Yeah,
thousands of years, for how to run and govern and operate organizations. And just because these are the newest ones doesn't mean they're always going to be the right tools for every situation, and doesn't mean they should be used exclusively without some of the older tools and approaches too. So, I think, to me, that's part of what will make DAO successful, is actually being a little bit um, less focused on avoiding the way things have been done in the past, and maybe more focused on embracing some of the things that have been done in the past with this new technology we have now. I mean, even thinking about, to your point about grant making or spending, I mean, it's a challenge that,
yeah,
I mean, just look at nonprofits and charities that make grants and the challenges that they have and the approaches they use to try to make good decisions. Anyone who's trying to build a grant making organization today in a DAO, I assume, will do a worse job if they don't at least look at the history of how to do grants well and learn from it too, in addition to leveraging modern
definitely.
technology.
There was a really funny or sad congressional hearing a couple of months ago, and it was someone from I think DoD or Pentagon, and the Congress was asking them, where did this money go, and what happened to these things? And they had to answer honestly, we don't know where these billions and billions and billions of dollars went. Blockchain's a great way of saying I
Yeah.
know exactly where every dollar got spent. The things that ail societies, right? How do we make sure money's going to the right places? How do we do good, thoughtful, retrospective audits of how money got spent, and then assess how do we not make those same mistakes and make them better? If you don't even have the tools to say how do we spend money badly, then you can't fix it for the next time. Like these tools are going to change society. I think government's actually a great use case. Public utility companies are another great use case, right? There's some types of businesses,
Yep.
usually we describe them as public utilities, that that are societally beneficial to have sanctioned monopolies. And by monopolies, I mean that they should be the only one doing a particular service because there's a good reason for it, right? I don't want to have 20 different power and electricity companies having to run power lines 20 different
Mhm.
times over so I can choose between 20 different services. So they need to be structured as a public utility company. What that also means is they still need to be profit seeking. So you're trying to balance all these things. A public utility company would be a great example of something of, yeah, let's make sure that the money that's getting spent by the people who are using it, the citizens who are getting electricity, who have a need, that the money's going to the proper places, getting spent properly, that the budgets are getting spent reasonably, that there's good incentives baked into it. So you don't scratch your head and go, where
Yeah.
where did where did that money go? So I'm excited to see this use case start to permeate. How do we actually allow the everyday citizen to conduct their own audits, not just trust someone? Yeah, an audit got done. Trust us, the money's being spent
Right.
accordingly. It's like citizen auditing almost when a lot of data is on chain and available.
It's a great point, and I think it's important for us all to recognize that even if you just take DAO technology, just take that component of it that makes the use of money and the making of decisions transparent, that alone could be so transformatively valuable. Even if you
Yeah,
don't decentralize everything else about the organization, right? Just do
totally.
those things digitally, do them on the blockchain or a similar public ledger, and then
Entirely.
just use the traditional legal system for accountability. You don't even need
Yeah,
to do on-chain accountability.
right.
And that's such an unlock, even without all the rest of what we're building for DAOs.
You know how earlier I was talking about we have uh, social contracts and we have mechanical enforcement. Blockchains and smart contracts are really good for mechanically enforcing what did we agree on and make that thing happen. I think there's a lot of these fun thought experiments that wholeheartedly expect will be implemented in the years and decades ahead. It's going to take a while, but think about this, right? If people all were voting on chain for their congressmen, for their senators, for things like this, people would feel better about the legitimacy of voting.
Yeah.
But then you could also start taking this to the next step. Okay, so this person, let's say Adam, right? You get elected Senate to the Senate. Your ID card the day after you get inaugurated allows you to walk into the Senate because that's connected to the actual voting system. You get voted out by the people. Your swipe card doesn't work anymore. You're not allowed in that building. The person who replaced you is now allowed in that building. So all of a sudden, you actually have legitimate mechanical solutions to things like the peaceful transfers of power. Someone who
Mm.
says, "I refuse," like even something like, right, what's the actual system to press a red button, right? Right, the big red button. It's a thought experiment, although actually a real thing. What's the actual governance behind that? If you have real mechanic enforcement, you don't have this like weird situation where, oh, the wrong person the wrong way was able to do something just because they refused to give up power. Mechanically enforcing these things from the ground up, from the grassroots up, allowing democracy from actual process of election through the rest of the system, permissioning, access control, all of these things should be done through powerful cryptography and through blockchain
Mhm.
systems, without a doubt.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like we're saying, rather than just have democratic systems implemented by small groups of people who can cheat, now we have the potential to have democratic systems that directly control things, and that's an important security guarantee we may want.
Let's self audit our own systems and make sure they're actually working the way they're designed to. The
Yep.
design is good in theory, and blockchains help with the practice and execution of enforcing, make sure it's actually done the way we all said it should be done this way.
Yep. Love it. So we're already over time, so I want to turn to the conclusion. First of all, if folks want to find me or the podcast on Twitter or Farcaster or anywhere, it's not that hard to do. MyDAO is MyDAO DS for MyDAO Directory Services. I'm Zero X Thriller or The Thriller on Farcaster. Graham, where can people find you and your projects on the web and on social?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm G Novak underscore. Also on Telegram, GONOVAK. Those are probably the best two places to find me. You can go on our website, mezzanine.xyz, sign up for our beta, reach out to me. If you've got an application, happy to talk to you about putting on the platform. If you want to use the products that we've got, happy to talk to you about beta testing. And happy to chat. I'm a huge
Awesome.
fan of this space, and Adam, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. Just a quick ad for my DAO again. A reminder to anyone listening that we do legal entities for DAOs, and we have a partner network of lawyers and tax advisors all over the world who work with DAOs and Web3 projects. If you're looking to get connected with them or would like to be added to the network, please get in touch. Graham, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. Quick disclaimer, it's never legal advice. We're not lawyers. We're not financial advisors. Not financial advice. It's not tax advice. But finally, for the audience, are you thinking about starting a DAO? Just DAO it.